Hello, my dear viewers. This amazing story will be very instructive for you. It is very interesting and beautiful. I wish you enjoy watching it.
Oliver hated being called a bum, a beggar, or a tramp. He preferred the socially neutral term free artist. He had felt that way long before he had been on the street. What was he, really, a bum? It was just that living within four walls was weighing him down. Besides, he really was an artist. Once his paintings were popular and in demand. In those glorious times, he even held several chamber exhibitions in small galleries. A dozen critics called the work significant, and a couple more disgusting ointment. At that moment, the artist didn't care what some underachievers said about him. Customers paid off solid fees for portraits, which Oliver, in his own apt expression, wrote the heel of a jackleg. It is not that he bathed in money, but the need did not know, and enjoyed widespread fame in narrow circles. However, fortune is a capricious girl, and after many years of upsurge, after worldly fame and relative wealth, can always come a period of oblivion. For Oliver, that time dragged on. First, he sent a gallery owner on a pedestrian journey who tolerated all his antics and picked up customers. Here's what George, the artist, said that day. "You're literally stealing from me. You're forcing me into some kind of channel where I'm cramped. I'm going free, do you hear me?" What George said, Oliver couldn't remember. Then he proudly slammed the door, leaving his apartment. He left his shamed wife and children, who by then were relatively mature and tired of his antics, and went on a free voyage. At first, everything was fine. His own studio, clients, sitters, and wine, a whole sea of wine, in which he began to choke every now and then. "You'll come back to me." Helga, his lawfully wedded wife, shouted at him as he left with a small suitcase. "You'll come crawling back on your knees." "I will," Oliver replied with a smile. "That's what you were before me, huh? Just a little shop girl. And now, an artist's wife. Sounds proud, doesn't it?" As he left Helga, the free artist smiled. He never fought at all, cutting bridges. It's just that life in one marriage, in one gallery was weighing on him, especially all these conventions, to sleep at home, to be faithful to his wife, not to bring to the apartment of favorite women, not to sell Nojeko paintings to random customers, and not to exhibit in other galleries. Of course, the wife could tolerate this at the beginning of their life together. Oliver's lifestyle seemed to her bohemian and suing respect. She also saw him as a genius, but gradually the free-spirited artist became too voluminous a figure for their modest third-floor apartment. There were high ceilings of more than 3 meters, but even that was not enough for the flight of the soul. The gallery, which brought him a good income, also became too cramped. He saw himself as a rising star of world painting, but the outlines were ghostly. He was going to conquer Paris, Berlin, Madrid, one by one. And he would have, if it hadn't been for a morbid addiction to alcohol. So he left both the gallery and the apartment, where he even thought of going out of the window. But the third floor is too small for that flight, which sometimes allow themselves to make a saturated life creators. That's why Oliver went out not through the window, but through the door, and has been wandering the world for 10 years. "You are not a bum," said to him another acquaintance over a bottle of cheap wine. "You're the best artist in the world." "No," Oliver replied flirtatiously. "The best, but not in the world, but in the country." "You're a genius," continued the acquaintance, enjoying a drink at someone else's expense. "No, no, not at all," objected the artist. "I am not a genius, but outstanding, but only to find my paints, brushes, and sketches." Casual acquaintances did not stay with him longer than there was money left for food and drink. The older Oliver got, the worse his teeth and hair looked. The fewer women became willing to take him in and model for him. And now the thought of returning to Helga didn't seem quite so frightening anymore. Especially since he knew that half of the apartment still belonged to him, and that he could find a job as a decorator, or a painter at the worst. He could work with large volumes and liked it too, but his pride wouldn't let him. This quality, without which it is unthinkable to achieve success in any field, is gradually becoming a yoke, a burden that dragged him to the bottom, into a pool of wine and vices. That morning, the chief physician's anxiety was at its peak. His best quality is intuition. It worked well in diagnosis, but it did not help at all in management. He had an intuitive sense of what a person was like, but he didn't always understand what to do about it. So when the phone rang in his office, he already realized that he would not hear any good news. Unfortunately, we have to say goodbye to you. The velvet voice on the other end of the wire did without preamble and did not tolerate objections. Really? Andrew perked up. Why? You are unable to clean up the hospital, the voice said. Our orders have not been executed for months. I dare to disagree, said the chief physician, loosening his tie. In principle, if he was going to argue with the caller, it was only for pro forma. In fact, he was glad of the unexpected freedom. The hospital was in perfect order. The occupancy rate is less than 90%. The recurrence rate is very low. How long will you put up with the ritual store near the main entrance? The voice asked. How many complaints do we have to listen to before we reach your mind? Or at least your heart? What does it mean to tolerate? The former chief physician was perplexed. A ritual store for the hospital is quite a thing. Their people can buy everything they need if something goes wrong, and in general, what are you implying? Me? The voice interjected. You should have told me that a month ago. Silence. Andrew really couldn't and didn't like to lead. All affairs were handled by his deputies, to whom he gave full freedom of action. In fact, he was the one who started the funeral parlor of some shrewd businessman. But the hospital received money for the rent, and also, according to Andrew's firm belief, the proximity of such an institution should discipline the patients. I'm giving you one last chance, the voice said. I was persuaded to fire you for incompatibility with your position, but you understand. You won't be able to. I get the hint. Andrew reported cheerfully. It's easy. I'll write a letter right now, but don't forget that I am a materially responsible person. To whom will I transfer the household? What if the new person is missing something? For this, do not worry, assured the voice. Make an inventory and leave the business. The new head doctor is not your concern. The voice hung up. Andrew sighed. This is not how he had imagined his departure. In fact, it's even better. There would be no proceedings, lavish send-offs and tears of longing. He would write a statement, leave his keys and goodbye. He couldn't wait to get back to practicing medicine. Better yet, to go to some remote village with 10 houses and treat there. That's where the life is. That's where the real challenges are. To lead a large hospital he liked at first, but gradually all the pleasure came to naught. Half the time all he did was sign papers and deal with the complaints of disgruntled patients. Christopher, Andrew said, pressing the call button. Christopher, dance. You're going to have a new boss. The weather can be nice in September, but it's best not to take any chances. That's why Oliver wore a raincoat. You never know when it's going to start raining. Winter was coming soon, so the free artist had to find a temporary home. He had an option in mind. His once good friend, whom he called not an artist, but a craftsman. To ask him for help, he had to step on his own pride. After making his way to the private sector, he went through the open gate without a bell and knocked on the door of the cottage. After a couple of minutes of waiting, a friend appeared in the doorway, and his face could not be called pleased. Hello, Vance, Oliver said courteously and bowed, standing on the doorstep to his longtime friend. Long time no see, friend. I was just passing by, so I thought I'd stop by and see how you were doing. I'll see if you've restored the gazebo that I destroyed last time due to my gross negligence. What do you want? The man answered rudely. Are you trying to make a pig of me again? Or a whole pig farm, eh? With Vance in the past, They had a long-standing collaboration. Both artists, they had taken very different paths. If Oliver was really looking for concentrated freedom, Vance was looking for enrichment. If Oliver was in demand with women and drew inspiration from them, Vance was never really loved. This information, of course, had to be kept in mind and kept to himself. But the free artist could not. At the last creative evening, which rolled into a banal feast, Oliver told Vance everything he thought about him. He did not keep silent about the greed of his comrade, who not a dozen times helped him financially. And lastly, he burned the carved arbor, admiring the flames of his favorite element. It was about 6 months ago, and since then the entrance to the hospitable house of the old comrade was closed. "I should like to spend the night," Oliver asked, as if nothing had happened. "To go to your bathhouse. I'd like to make pies on your charming stove. By the way, did you put the tandoor together like you dreamed?" "That's a wrap," Vance replied, not leaving the doorway. Oliver was looking for a way to get ahead, to sit on the living room couch, and then God himself wouldn't be able to kick him out. "Why don't you put my youngest daughter in the bed? To keep your old bones warm?" Considering the age of the artists, and each of them is close to the 6'10", the proposal did not seem so vulgar, and the daughter is long since matured and overripe. She was 30, and Vance had given up hope of getting her out of her creative home and into someone else's marriage. "I'm sorry, friend," Oliver said. "I overreacted that time. I was wrong, I was rude, I was unfriendly. I let down a man I should have been proud to know, and I. The artist rolled his eyes and raised the elbow of his hand to his face, depicting sincere remorse. "Really?" Vance marveled, shifting to a whisper. "Only that time? Or do you only think of my friendship when you need a place to sleep and a drink?" "Well, and all the times before that," agreed the free artist. "Yes, you're right. I don't know how to value either friendship or love. I've betrayed 100 times the people I should have held on to. There must be a flaw in my soul, somewhere in my heart, a little demon that's undermining me from the inside." My God, what a speech. Vance admired him insincerely and splashed his hands. "But I've lost count of the number of times you've said something like that. 10? 20? It's about time you thought of something else." "Vance, you have to understand," Oliver pleaded. "Winter is coming, and I have nowhere to go. So you want to stay with me again until spring? Is that why you've come all this way, clopping around in your worn-out boots?" "Of course," Oliver rejoiced. He took the rough tone as an unspoken agreement. "We'll have a great time. I'll write a dozen pieces for you. You can sell them and make good money. My name is still remembered and my paintings are waiting, right?" Of course, Oliver was being dishonest. He'd started several mediums in his friend's studio at his own request, but he'd never finished a single one. And given his specific technique, it was unlikely that anyone had managed to complete the projects. Besides, Oliver flatly refused to paint exactly what the master of the house demanded, and the resulting smudge would hardly sell for good money, if at all. "Don't spoil my canvases and paints." Vance was indignant. He was ready to forgive his comrade once again, but the mention of unfulfilled orders was the last straw. He was the one who had to work day and night in the workshop to meet the deadline. He was such an overly obliging man. "For the love of God, please don't touch the brushes in my house." "So you're letting me in?" Oliver asked with a smile. He interpreted Vance's mood in his own way. "I could tell you a lot of things, you know, but you're better with your tongue. I could never do that." "So just, no," the former comrade said and slammed the door loudly in Oliver's face. This world had never been so cruel to a freelance artist. If even his best friend left him alone on the cold streets, who could he rely on? Of course he was unfair to Vance. Too often he called him a lowlife, a talentless person, an imitator, an opportunist, a canvasser, mocked his commissioned canvases, laughed at the way Vance himself makes frames with a mitre saw and thus extracts an extra penny from the order. Emptied his home bar with such speed that the owner had to hide wine and cognac in hiding places on the plot. But Evan nodded with restraint, though his medical sense told him that he would not like this big official's offer. Since he had poured a bucket of flattery on him, he was about to be asked to do something that he wouldn't do in his right mind. Which, in principle, you could refuse, but I don't think you came all this way just to give me a favorable review, Evan said. Though I do appreciate being seen and recognized for my efforts. Right? Jack smiled. What if I told you that a small but very affluent town needed a chief physician? A well-known cardiac hospital. Evan immediately grew sad. There were many hospitals on the map of his vast homeland. Where things were going well, chief physicians could lead for decades, and where there were problems, the chiefs changed periodically. And where there hadn't been a real owner for a long time, it was hard to build a system from scratch. What city? Evan asked, even though he already knew what we were talking about. The city you know best, Jack smiled. The city that gave us such a promising and brilliant doctor. No, Evan cut him off. I'm definitely not going there. The smile never left Jack's face. An experienced official, he knew which strings to pull, which keys to press to get the right tune. And if the doctor couldn't be bribed with flattery, he had to use the heavy artillery. It's something he knew and loved. Rumor has it, the official yawned, that you can't find texture for your work. Work? Evan was surprised. Well, with good results. Jack stretched out, with the right persistence. Damn it, nothing is impossible in this world, my dear colleague. In two, Evan repeated in a tone that brooked no objection, and I'll be challenged by someone who actually knows medicine, not a pretender. 2 years, the official savored these words like an expensive wine. Will you really have time, my dear colleague? And will I have time to convince everyone? I'll work nights. In that case, Jack's smile became even wider, which seemed contrary to anatomy. In that case, we need to discuss the details and choose a date on which you're ready to begin your duties. I'll turn in my files and get to work. Friday at the latest. The official stood up, adjusting his jacket. Evan hated healthcare workers who favored formal dress. He himself always wore what he was comfortable in. That's what you can do to help a patient in a jacket and white shirt. One last thing, muttered the official. Start working at the hospital by looking for new deputies. The ones we have are no good, if you say so. After his conversation with Jack, Evan felt as if he'd done something immoral. Should he have accepted a transfer to another hospital, even if it was as chief of medicine? He cherished the hope that as soon as he became a candidate of medical sciences, he would immediately break into the vertical of medical power and bring order there, so that hospitals and polyclinics would receive not only criticism, but also equipment and medicines. Still, the feeling was sickening. Why had he said he was coming to the new place on Friday? What was the rush? It was already Wednesday. Evan went to the smoking room he'd been avoiding for a year and a half. And there he met the man whose help he needed right now. Give him a smoke, he asked Carlo, his friend and longtime colleague. You quit, the doctor replied, taking a cigarette out of the pack. Yes, Evan agreed, lighting up, and picked it up again. I'm transferred. Tomorrow is the last day. Will now be the head doctor. I heard that, Carlo smiled. Rumors have been going around the hospital for a week. Congratulations. The smoke burned his lungs. Why is he the last to hear the news? When the big official from the Ministry of Health had announced his arrival, he had already suspected the possibility of a promotion, but he wasn't sure. Carlo could have at least hinted at it. I'm not happy about it. I've always dreamed of being a chief physician, but not in this hospital. Any reason? Carlo asked. Yes, there are. Deeply personal. Is it a lot of work? No, Evan shook his head. There's a patient there, you know. One I don't want to cross paths with. Patient? Carlo was surprised. Where are you and where are the patients, Evan? Are you going to celebrate the promotion or not? Only in a small circle, a very small circle. Cars were passing by, but they didn't care about a homeless man about to throw himself off a bridge. No one even slowed down to shout encouragement. After the foot got stiff, the free artist put it on the ground. Now they had to wait for the cramp to pass. In half an hour, only one patrol car had stopped near Oliver. The bridge, spanning high over the river, was the main attraction of the area. The water gave Oliver inspiration, and he had once painted a series of landscapes depicting the enchanting place. "Come on, jump," Thomas demanded it. "Jump. The whole town will breathe a sigh of relief. I'll keep going." The police inspector, if he followed all the instructions, was supposed to stall and dissuade suicides from jumping into the abyss, and also to furtively call a psychologist, so as not to provoke the person to take decisive action. But Thomas had deviated from the instructions by 180 degrees. He was fed up with the antics of Oliver, who thought he was a brilliant artist. "Why didn't you leave?" he asked. "I didn't have time," the artist replied. "Then fly away. How long am I going to stand here and cheer you up?" At this time of year, the vagrant usually left the city and went to winter in warmer places. And there he'd piss off the local police with his inability to live in society. This year it's all gone wrong, which means trouble and more work. Thomas was being ironic when he suggested that the artist jump, but it was a joke about his secret desires. "You've got to stall me," Oliver objected, as if you don't know the instructions. "I do," Thomas replied. "I know, that's why I'm going to confront you while no one is looking. Come here, come closer." Oliver was always messing up the townspeople's lives, mostly with his words and vulgar pictures, which the artist considered masterpieces. And it would be all right if the tramp did something serious and disappeared from sight for a long time. Thomas knew from experience that in penitentiaries there was a high demand for those who could draw. No, the antics would be of a kind that could not be expected to last for a long sentence of 15 days at most. The free artist did not argue with the guardian and stepped away from the low railing. He raised his hands, showing that he realized his mistake and changed his mind. "I understand," he replied. "I get it. Thanks to your heartfelt words, Thomas, I have decided to abandon my shameful scheme and continue to bring bright colors to this grey earth. Can you give me a ride to the hospital?" "All right, get in," Thomas nodded. "Only on the paper. And don't ever leave the hospital. Do you hear me?" Fall is deceiving. The homeless know it especially well. You can be sweltering hot during the day and freezing cold at night. In their city, the range of temperatures was extremely wide, and while during the day in September some people managed to sunbathe and even swim a little in the river, at night the frost on the grass or car windows could turn to ice. That was why Oliver wanted so badly to wait out the months ahead. Otherwise, October would have to be spent in some basement or attic. For a while after his wife left him, he had a workshop that was supposed to be heated with a wood stove. Oliver had been told 100 times that the wood should be loaded into the furnace gradually, not to heat the stove to red hot. But what do these people know about art? Once, when he had a session with a charming model, he overdid it. The model wouldn't let go of her bra until the temperature in the studio was close to acceptable levels. So he loaded the stove to the limit and splashed kerosene to be sure. Of course, that house did not burn down. The fireman, who immediately arrived at the call and thoroughly doused the hearth of the fire, prevented it. But all 5 floors below the attic were seriously damaged by water. Not only his work, but also his pride died in this element. So when the frost comes, he'll have to seek survival in the basement. When I was in jail, liked to tell the artist after this incident. In fact, for violation of fire safety, he was arrested for only 15 days. Some hotheads at the time wanted to make the artist pay, but what can you take from him? Since then, Oliver was panic-stricken by Borgias, preferring to warm himself with firewater. The artist liked the cardiac hospital. The main building was 8 stories high, and not only locals were sent here. There is always someone to talk, fight, and drink with. Excellent canteen. If you know how to be persistent, they'll feed you well. The appearance was somewhat spoiled by the proximity of the ritual store. It was located in an annex near the main building, as if to suggest that it was waiting for patients who were not ready to follow the doctor's recommendations. Oliver didn't mind the proximity, for he wasn't afraid of death. He would have to wait out the future frosts, hold out a little, and then the strait would be waiting. Alas, the medical registrar was not inclined to share his aspirations. "Patient, keep order," the woman asked. For 10 minutes now, she had been trying to explain to the free artist that becoming a hospital patient was not so simple. "We shouldn't hospitalize you without a referral. Don't hold up the line or I'll be forced to call security." She's new, isn't she? The threat made no impression on Oliver. As soon as the guard saw the troublemaker, he hid in his booth and just watched through a slit in the ground. Near the registrar's office, there was a decent queue. The artist was preventing those who really needed help from getting it. "And I say, you should not, but obliged to hospitalize me," shouted Oliver. "My health is disgusting. Look how my hands are trembling." The artist stretched out his palm. The tremor was visible to the naked eye. However, after so many years of drinking and wandering, it was a relatively minor problem. It was worse when it came to filling his stomach. Oliver hadn't had a poppy in his mouth since morning, and he was hungry and thirsty. "Man, I've told you for the last time, it's not allowed," the receptionist replied patiently. "First get a referral in the district polyclinic, then undergo an examination, take tests, and then welcome to the hospital. I do not have so much time," pathetically shouted Oliver. I'm dying. I need immediate, urgent care." "Next," said the receptionist, and turned away from the free artist. The angry crowd shifted the old man to the very edge of the counter. Outraged, Oliver was still making noise and swearing for a long time. He said that he had given himself to this city and people by immortalizing them both on dozens of canvases. Claimed he'd ruined his heart by worrying about the future of the locals. Like Michelangelo, he spent nights in the studio creating masterpieces, ruining his eyesight. He asked at least for free food vouchers in the canteen. But the crowd didn't listen to him and lived their own lives. "I'll complain," Oliver said finally, stopping at the guard's booth. "I'll go to the head doctor, then come back tomorrow," the man said. "There's a new head doctor on Friday, and we'll see if he'll listen to you." "Who said that?" the painter asked. The voice sounded familiar to him. But there was no one in the booth, not even after Oliver had bent over to look inside. "No one," the guard answered, continuing to hide. "No one said there's no one here. Just go already. The sanitarium is cancelled." And when the artist had moved a safe distance away, the guard rose and added, "That Walker. Modern genius. Damn him." It was not a flight, however, but a diversion, for Oliver was not going to surrender without a fight. Retreating to the main entrance, he made one last attempt to storm the building. It was a busy Thursday afternoon outside the hospital. If he faked a heart attack believably enough, he'd be admitted to the hospital. It's all about believing himself. What does a heart attack look like? As he stepped out onto the porch, Oliver suddenly shrieked, putting all his artistry into his voice and movements. "Help! People! Help me! I'm dying! Oh, farewell, motherland!" and collapsed on his knees. Apparently, the sudden action, hunger and forced sobriety had made him really dizzy. Oliver felt that he really didn't feel well, began to gulp air like a fish. The sounds began to drift away, and the picture first turned green and then dim. He grasped the handrail with all his might, but his weakened fingers couldn't manage it. "Is he ill?" the woman questioned, standing in front of the free artist. "Is he really ill?" "Coldly, citizen, coldly," said the guard. He ran up to Oliver with the most experienced man, the local Zaphos, the deputy chief physician on the economic part. "Now," the doctor will say. "Calm down, I'm a doctor," said the storekeeper and pretended to check his pulse. The man knew Oliver all too well. The free artist had spent a couple of years in the ward on his floor, turning the model ward into an artistic commune. And then he'd kept himself discharged for a long time, faking heart attacks every now and then. When the superintendent took the homeless man's dirty hand, ostensibly to check his pulse, he immediately wanted to disinfect his palms. "Pulse is fine," the man said to the crowd. He didn't want to check the rest of his body. "He's just a faker who's gonna make normal people run out of room in the hospital. You grab the legs, I'll grab the arms." The guard and the storekeeper dragged the beggar around the corner, where he was much less visible. "It's nothing," Christopher thought. "He'll lie down for a while and then he'll be gone." However, how he has got into the part. Indeed, Oliver did not utter a sound as they dragged him, though the way was a decent distance. The artist's head was thrown back, so the men had to be careful. "What's the matter, imposter?" said the bolder guard as they laid Oliver down on the pavement. "Nothing to say, faker." The artist only mumbled something unintelligible. His consciousness hadn't left him, but it was very foggy, and even the feeling of resentment toward those who should have helped and saved him was dulled. He thought that if it was death, it was no big deal. It wasn't painful at all, and it was hardly scary at all. He had always dreamed of meeting a creator and asking his opinion of his own works, whether they were masterpieces or cheesy. There are several reasons why a person does not want to return to his hometown. The main one is the potential meeting with people you don't want to see at all. Evan is fully committed to medicine, a noble endeavor, and he's been dedicated. Cardiology is one of the most challenging fields, but it's also one of the most promising. Starting a new patient was like walking through a minefield, but a mistake here cost the life not the doctor, but his ward. After all, more people die from heart and blood pressure problems than from armed conflicts. It wasn't just about saving lives. The cardiovascular system fascinated the doctor so much that he saw it as a model of the universe. Evan could talk for hours about how this organ is organized, why people suffocate, and how important it is to keep healthy. But his passion for medicine had a downside. At 35, he had nothing besides a dizzying career. No hobbies, no home, no wife, no children. Loneliness sometimes burdened, but there was no shortage of potential female admirers. The reason for loneliness and reluctance to return to his hometown are closely connected. His entire childhood was spent in the constant scandals of his mother and father. In the end, his father left, loudly slamming the door, which his mother has never forgiven him. Yes, Dad's temper was too difficult, but Mom wasn't exactly easygoing either. "So, Carlo," Evan said, filling small glasses with cognac. "Let's not drink too much, it's a lot of strain on the heart." "Come on," replied his colleague and former subordinate. "Once a week is fine." "Carlo, you're upsetting me," Evan said, deliberately serious. Cognac can be consumed only in small doses, savoring the noble drink, and monitor your blood pressure and liver function. It sounds like a toast. Carlo smiled and sipped from his glass. On the occasion of the transfer, Evan unsealed a bottle of rare and expensive cognac, which was given to him by a grateful patient. "I envy you," Evan sighed. "You have everything, and a wife, and a son, and a daughter, and most importantly, no ambition. You don't want to be the head of the department or the deputy chief physician. What's your secret?" "It's simple, Evan," Carlo answered. "Think about yourself. Think about yourself. Well, you'll make indicators to the ministry. You'll get the work done. You'll reduce the death rate. You can do it, Evan. I don't doubt it for a second. What's in it for you? You're just gonna hand your skills over to these frames. Your last name, your genes?" Carlo pointed to a wall hung with certificates of appreciation and diplomas. Certificates from the many courses Evan had attended crowded around it. If they were to be believed, there was simply no field in cardiology that didn't lend itself to a talented physician. "You're wrong," Evan said, filling his glasses. "I'm not doing all this for the ministry. I'm doing it for me. I'll get my dissertation and then I'll live. I'll get married." "I don't believe it." Carlo shook his head. "Why do you need a wife? You know how to do everything yourself. I think you could take out an appendix yourself, like the polar explorers, and without anesthesia." "Well, you're overdoing it here," waved his hand. "I'll have kids. I'll have kids. You need to choose a wife from pediatrics or nurses." They sat for 2 more hours, remembering cases from their rich medical practice. 3 years flew by like a day. Evan didn't stay anywhere for long, because moving around was easy for him. If you don't have a home or family, it's easy to move. It's all about moving up and moving forward. The main thing he had learned from his father was to hold back against his will. There were so many times in his life when he wanted to say what he thought about the other person. To humiliate, to hurt, to ironize. But medicine teaches you to spare other people's feelings, reminding you every day that you don't last forever. Evan gave himself exactly 1 day for handoffs and packing. That should be enough time to carefully pack his certificates and commendations in one box and his things in another. The departure from the physical shell took longer. Lying on the cold ground, the free artist continued to feel the breath of the wind, and a bug bit his finger painfully. But the old man did not move and stubbornly waited for the transition to a new dimension, which he had been waiting for so long. As soon as the last of his strength left Oliver, an angel flew down to him. "Look, it's him. Walker," a girl's voice called out. "It's him." Oliver opened his eyes wide. No, it wasn't an angel, it was a girl. There was a boy with her, too, who was not quite as expressive. They were walking together in a strange city, as adventurers should. And judging by the fact that he had never seen this couple on the streets before, they were newcomers. Yes, the color and identity seekers sometimes wandered into their town. "Help," Oliver asked. "Help me sit down." "Are you really Walker?" The girl wouldn't stop. "I did a term paper on your painting." "Really?" nodded the artist. The guys sat him down and leaned him against the wall. "Drink." The girl obligingly held out a bottle of water, but Oliver shook his head negatively and pointed to the hand of the guy who was sipping a beer. "When you come to a foreign city, everything tastes better here, even this vulgar drink." The young man thought for a moment, but gave the bottle to the old man. He literally sucked on the neck and poured every last drop into himself. "Oliver, are you sick?" the girl asked. It turns out that not just rare tourists, but those who are interested in art, have wandered into their city, and in the nameless homeless man lying near the picturesque street, recognized the artist. "Should I call a doctor?" No, my soul," Oliver replied. He was pleased to be known and remembered. "Lying here, in the shadow of the street, I've been gauging perspective. I was looking for inspiration for my new paintings. You see," said the young man, addressing the angelic girl, who couldn't get past Walker himself. "I told you, it's just a bum lying around. And you, bad for the artist, bad for the artist." "Peter, what are you?" the girl hissed at him. "You're embarrassing me." "Do not pay attention, it's just a joke." These words were already addressed to a new acquaintance, which she had previously seen only on the pages of a rare catalogue of paintings. "It's nothing. Artists quickly get used to criticism," Oliver said, although Peter's words hurt him. "How did you recognize me, my soul?" "There is only one famous artist in this city," shrugged the girl. "Besides, I remembered that ring on my index finger right away." Oliver looked at his hand. Indeed, his talisman, his trademark, had accompanied him throughout his career, both during his rapid rise and during his endless fall. The red stone looked like a sapphire caught in the clutches of course," answered the artist without a shadow of embarrassment. A complete exclusive. The Rise and Fall of Oliver Walker. Interested? The naked eye could see that the guy did not like the idea very much, but he'd come from far away, come at random, so he was ready for adventure at heart. Peter had no idea why this bum in dirty clothes his girlfriend called an artist, but in order not to quarrel, he was ready to tolerate the society of a strange man, especially since he looked harmless. Oh, that deceptive appearance. "We could use a guide," he said peacefully. "And don't worry about a glass of wine. We can let you have a bottle." "Really, Leslie?" "I don't think artists drink," said the angelic-looking girl. "Isn't that right, Mr. Walker?" "It's true, Leslie," Oliver nodded. "I hate those alcoholic liquids. I have to take them solely to induce inspiration in my soul and to make peace with the imperfections of the world around me." Things are neatly folded and organized in drawers. Letters of gratitude and certificates disappeared from the walls as if they didn't exist at all. The former head physician looked absent-mindedly at the inventory and understood nothing at all. In fact, he contemplated the figures only to avoid giving the impression of an incompetent person. "The paperwork seems to be fine," Andrew stretched out. "Are you leaving already?" Christopher, the author and executor of the inventory, asked obligingly. Even a dozen Ingalls would not be enough to uncover all his machinations. Not even coffee. "No, thank you," replied the former chief physician, "and we will not convene the staff. Now we'll sign the documents, and that's it." The deputy chief physician was really upset. How will he live without this nice and completely talentless head? How will he pull off scams and receive public and invisible support? Now the former chief physician refused the farewell banquet, although he had every right to do so. He's understandable. "Why were you fired?" Christopher asked in an innocent voice. He knew the reason, of course. "Oh, Christopher, it's like in a marriage," Andrew replied seriously. "It's a bad temper." "But not with his wife." "Oh, Christopher," said the former head doctor. The words of the deputy, that he is now a nobody, somewhat hurt. But by and large, they were fair. "I think I'll rest for a while. You know, running an institution like this is hard work. Anything else you need me to sign?" Christopher was thinking about how wonderful it would be to run a hospital. There's still a lot of areas where a good businessman hasn't stepped foot. But there was one small barrier between him and being head of the hospital. Small but insurmountable, at least at this stage of Christopher's career. The tour of the city was a kilometre-long road from the hospital to Morbulus's cafe. And what else could Oliver show these young, uneducated tourists? Referring to the fact that they were going to have a long walk, the free artist offered to refresh themselves, but not to drink alcohol under any circumstances. Supposedly, it makes tourism lose its elitism. The cafe, Morbulus's, was located in the basement of an old building. There was a terrific atmosphere, for which the place was loved by both locals and guests. The good weather only enhanced the feeling of a wonderful mood. Nearby was a charming fountain with a boy and a goose, another attraction. "Can't we even have a glass of beer?" Peter asked in surprise. "Absolutely not," Oliver objected eagerly. "Although the Morbulus has its own brewery, that's no reason to confuse alcoholism with tourism." "Is it real?" Leslie asked incredulously. "Or do they just dilute the concentrate and refrigerate it?" "It's the real thing," said the artist. "I dedicated a cityscape to this marvelous equipment. Would you like to check?" Oliver suggested a seat on the terrace. The weather was glorious, and he hoped that his dirty clothes would not give off an unpleasant odor here and spoil the mood of his unexpected sponsors. They took the large table the artist had pointed out to them. He himself positioned himself so that the waiter would not notice him until the last. When Mickey, the cafe worker, approached, he immediately put his hands to his sides. "You got your listeners again?" he asked, looking at Oliver. "What do you think you're doing, young man?" The artist was indignant. "My new companions have traveled a long way to enjoy the beauty of this city. I demand that their order be fulfilled as a matter of priority." Who's paying? Mickey asked unceremoniously. We are paying, replied Peter with a smile. He must have misunderstood the waiter's aggression and thought it was some kind of elaborate game. Mr. Walker said that they serve excellent beer here. We'd like to try the freshest. Yes, bring 3 glasses of dark and 3 of light, Leslie asked. Oh wait, you'll drink to meeting us too, won't you, Oliver? Well, the artist drummed his fingers on the table. Only if you insist. But then I'd ask for more wings. These wings are great. So the waiter summarized. 3 glasses of light, 3 glasses of dark and wings. 3 servings, Peter said. We can put down a deposit. That won't be necessary, Mickey smiled. Right away. I hope you know what you're doing, young people. Oliver really found an appreciative audience. A boy and a girl listened to his stories about how masterpieces were created. Anticipating a brilliant drink, he immediately became a goldsmith. The planning horizon of a beggar is narrowed down to one day, and if the future in this perspective is rosy, then you can relax. The day dissolved imperceptibly in the rays of sunset, and beer as smoothly passed into fortified wine. The tourists were quite tipsy, but the free artist could not boast of sobriety either. At such moments, he forgot that he had long ago lost his studio, lost his brushes and paints, and slipped to the bottom of life. He was awakening in him the very artist who, thanks to the efforts of unknown authors, got into the anthologies of creativity. So when are we going? Leslie asked. To see the city? I could use a stretch. You didn't stretch enough, my soul. The artist asked me sympathetically. Waiter. No, I'd had enough alcohol. The girl waved her hands. I'm not even sure I can go. The incomparable Leslie. The hop unleashed Oliver not only his tongue, but also his sinful thoughts. Have you ever done any modeling? No, smiled the girl. Why, am I suitable? Of course. The artist said eagerly. You can write anything, even an angel or a femme fatale. There are such universal types that... And Oliver went into a long story about how many models he'd had in his life. Leslie's cheeks reddened from the savory details, and Peter's fists grew leaden. He watched with anger as the low-down bum picked on his girlfriend right in front of his eyes, and she didn't seem to mind the attention. Listen, Mr. Nemtsov. Finally, Peter said. Walker, corrected the artist and smiled disgustedly. Never mind. I think you've had enough to drink, and we've had enough of your drunken company. And you're not a very good guide either. The guy's diction, despite the amount of alcohol he drank, was clear. He only began to pull the vowels as if he was trying to speak in a chant. The fact that the artist was intoxicated was evident only by his sly eyes and increasingly swaggering behavior. So, listen to me, said Oliver, finishing his 3rd bottle of fortified wine. You're a good-looking, handsome man, but you don't even know how to live. Me? Peter asked again. He had had less to drink, but he had not had much experience in this business either. And this old man, who was only trying to humiliate him, was getting on his nerves. Do you think that if Leslie had a choice, she would be with you, a man stupid and uncreative? Would she have been with you? No, she'd leave. She'd go to an artist for emotion, for feeling. To someone who could give her not a new phone, but a storm of unrivaled feelings, immortalize her beauty on canvases, and that was the last straw. While Oliver continued his denunciation, the young man stood up, grabbed the artist, and threw him into the fountain with the chair. In flight, the artist experienced a feeling of lightness and longing. It was as if it was happening not to him, but to another person, and not in reality, but in a dream. After the splash of water on the terrace, there was a sepulchral silence. It was broken by Mickey's applause. Brilliant, said the waiter. The establishment will gladly give you a discount of 20% off the final check. It seemed to Paul that Oliver had gone to the bottom and was not coming out. Several customers ran up to the fountain to help the unfortunate man. Leslie seemed ready to fall through the ground from shame and embarrassment. Evan looked around the office to see if he'd forgotten anything important. It looked like he'd taken everything. Thanks to this madhouse, let's go to another one. For several years, he had been working as the head of the cardiology department, angry at someone, hoping for something. And now he was going to conquer a new peak. Evan was sure that one day he would be able to change the medical system so that it would turn to the patient. And along with the bureaucratic grin, it showed a nice, neat smile. "So that's how we're leaving," he heard a familiar voice behind him. "So we're saying goodbye, huh? Well, it's not like I'm a patient. I don't necessarily need to be treated humanely or humanized." Evan turned around. Victoria stood on the doorstep, the most talented nurse of the department, and also his favorite. She was an incredibly beautiful girl, with a chiseled figure and a charming face, but a sharp tongue. For the past 2 years, they only pretended not to meet and do not love each other. Rumors about their relationship circulated in the hospital, but Young and Happy denied them. "We're not saying goodbye," Evan smiled. "Am I moving to another planet? I'll be 100 kilometers away from you. Do you know how often we'll see each other? Once a month, at least." Victoria chuckled to make another barb, but suddenly cried. Cardiologist inwardly was ready for any claims, jealousy, shouting, but not for tears. This female weapon instantly forced him to declare surrender. And now he, initially ready to clarify relations, suddenly softened instantly. And he began to think how to calm the favorite, and at the same time to explain to her that the final separation is not in his plans. "Victoria, come on," he said. "I wanted to leave without saying goodbye." "You're a fool, Evan," replied the girl. "You're a PhD in English, but you're a fool. To leave in English, you have to be an Englishman. And you, my cosmopolitan, can leave only foolishly." Vuka had recently turned 25, and all the nurses she had started working with after college had either gone off to study to be doctors or had jumped out and gotten married and gone on maternity leave. But who were they getting? Drivers, laborers, managers at most. Victoria wanted a prince. The only one available was Evan, who was more like a king in exile, an eternal wanderer, prevented from ascending to the throne by his enemies. "Victoria, come on," the cardiologist said again. "You and I are not saying goodbye. I believe in long-distance relationships." "Really?" asked the girl, "and I do not believe. Do you know how many proposals I've had? Marriage?" Evan was surprised. "I thought we were dating." "You're a fool, Evan," shouted the nurse. "Job offers. I'd had all kinds of job offers. Head nurse, private clinic. You're the only reason I've stuck around. I'm waiting for you to make me happy." Evan had to admit that she was right. It was high time for him to settle down, to have a family and children. They managed to hide their relationship even from their friend Grishka. That, by the way, is not very upset about the departure of a comrade. After all, not somewhere there is going, and on the promotion. "I'm sorry, Victoria," Evan exhaled. "I guess I'm just not ready. I'm just not ready yet, that's all." "For what?" "Well, for my family," the cardiologist replied. "If my kid gets sick, and you know what I'm like, I'll call a concilium. We'll discuss all the staff snot or, God forbid, upset stomach." "Silly, silly Evan," Victoria said, but in a calm voice. She took her man's hand. "We just have to try to do things the way people do." "How?" Evan asked. "I asked you to keep our relationship private so you wouldn't get strangled here. Do you know how hard it is for a husband and wife to be in the same team?" "I could handle that," Victoria replied defiantly. "Or haven't you seen how strong I am? I mean something else. You could have introduced me to your parents, rented an apartment together. You know, in the dormitory, there are no romantic meetings. Are you really that desperate for money for me?" Evan felt embarrassed. Even though he held a respectable position, he still lived in the dormitory as a lab technician. Except that they gave him a separate room. but the doctor did nothing to make it cozy. He didn't even hang a curtain on the window. Victoria lived a floor above, and she had to master the wonders of spy science so that no one would see their meeting, and he didn't provide her with any romance. If he gave her flowers, it was once a year, not more often. He never took her to the sea. True, always helped financially, but money is just a piece of paper, not feelings. It became a discovery for him that his Vicky, whom he shamelessly used for the last 2 years, also has a soul, and he seemed to have spit in that soul. Introduce her to his parents, Evan sighed, trying to change the subject and push the unpleasant feelings away. Alas, that's impossible. My parents, you know. And the cardiologist made a vague gesture, which could be interpreted in 2 ways if desired. Either absent in principle, or flew to another planet. Evan was ready to support any version, as long as he didn't tell the truth. But you have parents, Victoria shouted impatiently. I saw the lens. And they live in the same city where you go to work. You expect me to believe in such coincidences? Did you look at my documents? The cardiologist asked. Of course, replied the nurse. I need to know if you're divorced, if you pay alimony. Oh, come on. You understand. My parents are. How can I put it delicately? Well, you're not gonna like it. You got a woman in there. Victoria hissed angrily. Maybe your true love is out there waiting for you, and I'm just a substitute brigade for an urgent need. No, what are you? Said the doctor. Victoria, I realize how I look from the outside, and I realize I'm being a pig too. But you and I are adults. Can't we just? Evan, stop it. The nurse interrupted him, impatient. I believe you, but let's make a deal. If you're leaving for good. And don't call me, and don't write, and don't ask for anything. I'll never give you anything else, not one cell of my body. And I swear I'll marry the first tractor driver or combine harvester I see, whoever calls. Evan sighed. Victoria was really good for him. She not only knew her worth, she had it. And he treated her wrong, looked down on her. He used her love like he was taking raisins out of a bun. Everything tasty in his mouth and the rest on the floor. That's not right. But why didn't you think of that before? Victoria, he asked, give me a week. How about this? 1 week from now, and everything will come to a head. Either I propose to you, or we go our separate ways. Okay? The girl was silent, wondering what to say. There was a whole range of feelings on her face. She must have been trying to understand why she was wasting her time with this good but indecisive man. So, while the operation is going on and seconds count, he can make the right decision quickly. But if the question is about his personal life, he needs weeks, months, years. The answer to the indecisive suitor was forming in her mouth. You know what, Evan? The flight into the fountain was unpleasant, but it was sobering. The cold fall air was invigorating. Oliver thought that he'd really behaved inappropriately. But that thought existed in his head, without any remorse or desire to make amends. It was already done, so why worry about it? Thank you, he said to Peter, who approached the bum. Indeed, my closet should have been washed a long time ago. If you come near my girlfriend again, you hear me? Threatened the guy. I'll have you. Come on, Peter, come on. Leslie ran up to him. Oliver, I'm so embarrassed. It's okay, I deserve it. The artist smiled. He again wanted to make an offer to work for him as a model, but changed his mind, looking at the young competitor. Very, very glad to meet you. Young people, come to our city again. A murmur reigned in the cafe. The second waiter put a tray with 2 bottles of wine and rushed somewhere inside into the bottles. He was probably going to call Thomas to have Oliver detained and brought to the station, but such a prospect was not in the plans of the free artist. He thought that any situation, even the most unenviable, could be capitalized on. Besides, Oliver had a more pressing problem. He needed to dry his clothes before night fell. Of course, it wasn't as cold as December or January, but catching pneumonia was a real possibility. Fortunately, he already had a plan of action for such an eventuality. Getting out of the fountain, he slowly strolled away, and while the attention of all the visitors was drawn to the young hero who had sent him into the swim, Oliver nimbly stole 2 bottles of fortified wine left by the waiter and hid them in his coat. He walked out of the cafe with a victorious gait, waving goodbye to the woman at the table. Oliver moved a safe distance away, fearing not so much exposure as freezing. A plan to escape a cold death had already matured in his mind. Across the street from the cafe was a park that had recently been landscaped. They had put benches, gazebos, playgrounds for children, and most importantly, braziers where you could build a fire and use it to dry things. Oliver was lucky. Someone had recently roasted meat and left warm coals. The artist threw some brushwood he had gathered nearby and began to fan the flames. There was something philosophical in it, something eternal. It is true what they say, you can look at the fire endlessly. When the branches were burning, he put a couple of logs to them, as if they had been left there for him. When he was warm enough, Oliver found a large bough, pressed it into the ground, and hung up his coat to dry. He put his boots and socks on the edge of the brazier, away from the flames. He buried his feet in the sand mixed with ashes and sat down on a log. So he spent 2 hours warming himself by the flame and sipping wine from a bottle. The blissful warmth spread both outside and inside his body. Soon all problems began to recede to the periphery of his consciousness. Also, a great idea popped into his head. Who said he couldn't go to the hospital? When it gets dark, he'll climb in through the window. He'll pick any room, lie down in an empty bed and tell the patients. Do they have every single person in there accounted for? When it was finally dark and Oliver was dead drunk, he began his difficult journey to the medical center. It was not only the darkness, which was at least diluted by the streetlights, but also the native soil. It was trying to jump up and hit him in the face. He had to put his hands out so as not to scratch his nose. Finally, the hospital buildings appeared. The free artist, although he did not consider himself an old man, was no longer suitable for acrobatic feats. Conquering the fence seemed to him like climbing a mountain peak. He urgently needed an open window to get inside. Even the second floor was an insurmountable obstacle, but he was lucky. Someone had left a window open in the hospital annex, right near the main entrance, just where the guard and some other character had taken him today. It was at this point that the elevation went down, so it was possible to get to the open window without too much labor. The free artist was jubilant once inside. In the pitch darkness, he felt how drunk he was. There was a sepulchral silence in the ward. The patients were barely breathing, and Oliver sneaked around so as not to wake them. In the darkness, he felt the bed and groped for it. It was small, narrow, and the bureaucrats were saving money on everything. There was no blanket, and the pillow was small and ridiculous. This one was definitely unoccupied. Oliver crawled onto the crib, covered himself with a sheet, and fell into a dead sleep. It was comfortable, soft, warm, and peaceful. For some reason, the bed had soft sides, but the intoxicated mind of the free artist did not pay any attention to it. The arrival of the artist did not wake anyone, although he was making a lot of noise. I wonder why. Helga couldn't help herself from the happy news. Her son was returning to the city. Not just anyone, but the head doctor of the local hospital. She couldn't believe her happiness, that such a negligent father could have such a wonderful offspring. Ivan didn't spoil her with visits, but he didn't disappoint her with calls. Yesterday, he called and said, as if nothing had happened, "I'm coming home as a chief physician," that he would write a dissertation, and in general is going to reach for the stars. Helga was over the moon. She would have to bring home her old fool, and then life's journey could be considered a success. Of course, she could quite easily spend the rest of her days alone, but she felt it was her son, not her, who needed the reunion now. I could see why Evan had a grudge against her, that she could not keep Oliver, did not want to put up with his lifestyle and harsh words. And even though the artist had left her 10 years ago, she still worried about him. Worried. After all, 2 children on their feet. Where can I find him, that bastard? Vans, do you copy? Helga called a man who's got Oliver on his cell phone. I hear you, he answered. His voice was deliberately gruff, but Vance was a good man. A good man? Did you recognize him? The woman asked. Of course I recognized him, said the man. What? Are you calling to wish me happy birthday, friend? It was already in August, but better late than never. Oh, sorry, Vance, said Helga. That's not why I'm calling. Listen, I'm looking for my Oliver. Have you seen him? Of course I have. Vance's voice suddenly became rougher. He came by my place the other day, you bum. He told me he loved me, but his words, old girl, are not worth the air they're thrown into. I take it you didn't accept him. You didn't believe his words. No, the person I'm talking to answered. Listen, I work hard. My eyes can't see anything anymore. I can barely hold this brush. And him. Sleeping in ditches, drinking bitter in buckets like a cucumber. He walked 5 kilometers to me without even panting. Does he look good? Helga asked. She knew the answer to that question. With Oliver's health, even street life couldn't do him much harm. Excellent. Vance confirmed her guess. Listen, I got a call from a fellow from Morculus. He was relaxing there on the terrace. He saw such a thing. Helga thought for a moment, what are we talking about? And then she remembered the very place where she had tried her first cocktails when she was very young. Is this place still in demand among the public? Oh, it's a cafe? The woman was surprised. Wow, are they still in business? Of course, replied Vance. And you do not go out of the house at all? Oh, I go out, Vance. I go out. So what happened there in this cafe that... Oh, that's right. This dummy of ours found some kids, kissed them off, and one of them almost drowned him in the fountain. He held him underwater for 3 minutes. Can you believe it? Everything bubbled up. They wanted to call the police, but he got away unharmed. Helga waved her hand. Vance always liked to embellish. Tell you what, Vance, if you see mine, tell him I was looking for him. I don't feel well. I'm going to die. Just say so. What, old woman, is it true? Asked the interlocutor. You do not dare be that, do you understand? I'll think about it. Helga replied and hung up. Every change for the worse, Christopher thought, sitting in his cozy office. The leather armchair perfectly fit his generally slender figure. In the corner stood an expensive electric kettle with a built-in filter, coffee maker, humidifier, and other gifts from grateful contractors. If he suddenly wanted to rest, you can lie on the leather sofa, another surprise he received after the renovation of the entryway. But there's no time to rest for Christopher. On the door is a proud, gold-embossed plaque. Deputy Chief Physician for Housekeeping. It's a work of art. The printing is even, and there's not a blemish or dot on the surface. The most beautiful plaque in the country. Christopher was sure that even the Minister of Health himself had a worse seal. He made himself, and at the same time renovated the hospital, the buildings, and the surrounding area. Alas, the available space for repair and improvement in the hospital was running out. The money was running out, and Christopher still had to renew his car and send his son to language courses abroad. He'd have to make do. When he was appointed Deputy Chief Physician, the detractors laughed. Christopher doesn't even have a medical degree. You're not a doctor. Said one of his enemies, you're the storekeeper. Who gave you the right to be called Deputy Chief Physician? Christopher reacted coldly to such attacks, answering with restraint. With his detractors, he gradually sorted out, because the head cooks always have long and clean hands. Indeed, Is it a joke that a man who is not directly related to medicine became deputy chief physician? Christopher would answer this question in blocks. First, you have to convince everyone of your indispensability. Secondly, at all levels to create confidence that without the position of deputy chief physician in the hospital, cannot do without. Thirdly, to hold on to the position tenaciously from the last strength. And then all personnel storms will pass by. The previous chief physician took little interest in the affairs of the hospital, preferring to sit in his own office. For the last year, he had not been involved in any matters at all, leaving everything to his deputies. But Christopher was always in the thick of things, making the most of them. Like today, for instance. He saw that homeless man and brilliantly impersonated a doctor to get rid of him. He acted in such a way that not a single coin in the whole hospital and in the neighborhood could not fall silently for the deputy chief physician on the economic part. His special pride was the ritual store. Christopher rented out the premises on which it had grown up for an incredible profit. Not for the hospital, of course, but for himself. The paperwork said it was supposed to be something else. What it was, he couldn't remember. Every day, inconsolable relatives came to the funeral store to say goodbye. The trade in wreaths, lamps, ribbons, and crosses flourished. Of course, the view of the memorial paraphernalia from the main entrance to the hospital was not always to the liking of patients and visitors, especially when a hearse was parked in the parking lot. But to the disgruntled, Christopher always responded philosophically. "Memento mori," said the deputy chief physician. "Remember death. We all came out of the ashes, and it's only a matter of time before we return to the ashes." Speaking of ashes, he managed to get the hospital to buy the most expensive urns in the country. Unfortunately, there was a flaw. The waste garbage cans were too sturdy and had not been written off for 4 years. It was impossible to break them. He used to renew them every year or even more often. Christopher didn't rule out the possibility that he might have to sabotage the incredibly sturdy garbage cans and buy new ones. Everything was going fine before, but now there was a new challenge. A young, very green head doctor of only 35 years old is sent to the hospital, and what Christopher had heard about him did not inspire optimism. A fanatical, totally dedicated doctor. Most likely, he would not tolerate any kind of machinations and violations. On the contrary, he would stick his long nose into Christopher's finances, or, God forbid, force him to share. The day before, on Thursday, the deputy chief physician came to one of the medical buildings, where repair work was in full swing. According to the documents, they should have been finished 2 months ago. But the builders, who were hired by a clever contractor, were working very slowly. And after all, the certificates of completed work were signed long ago. The money was transferred. The previous head doctor did not get into such issues, but it is unlikely that his successor will be as malleable. "Move it, you bastards!" Christopher shouted, watching the workers. "Move, or I'll leave you penniless." But the foreman's words had no effect whatsoever. Finishers lazily wandered around the room and worked at a snail's pace. It was the kind of hopelessness and doom that slaves in ancient Rome must have worked with. Alas, Christopher was not a patrician, and therefore could not influence the slave laborers with the methods he had in mind. The chamberlain tried to calm down and pull himself together. In principle, if you work day and night, tirelessly, then by Monday it is quite realistic to finish. On Friday, the new head physician, most likely, will not delve so deeply into the affairs of the hospital. Besides, he had prepared a great program for him. Restaurant, billiards, sauna. "Come on, come on," Christopher shouted, dialing the contractor. The phone was unavailable. "Why are you shouting, father?" The builder, who smelled of wine, asked him. "There's no need to yell at us. We are experienced people." A smart man said, "If you do badly and quickly, the speed will be forgotten, but the quality will be remembered." And good deeds, as usual, are not done quickly. Can you do a good job? Christopher challenged. You just do it for me, no matter how. It's better to take your time with bad things, too, Father, or what happens? If you do bad things, that'll be accepted late. That's what I'm telling you. No, I couldn't argue with those bastards. That's what very glad to meet you, the man said. My name is Christopher, and I'm your first deputy. Let's talk like this, simply. Evan Christopher, no barriers, no limits. Just keep it simple, keep it right. What do you say? Something about this man seemed familiar to Evan. The voice, I think, and the sweater. Where had he seen him before? Maybe at a reception. Right, this is the same guy from the video he saw this morning. Not a lot of views, of course, but still. The chief medical director pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. The link was saved. Hello, Christopher, Evan said. I'm the new chief physician. I wonder where I've seen you before. And then I answered on the internet. Look, aren't you in this video? He turned on his phone and showed it to his deputy. But he wasn't embarrassed for a second. Putting the same trademark smile on his face, he said without hesitation, You see how well we're doing. We cured him. Cured who? The head doctor was surprised. You know who, the patient. Here. Did not go a little bit to the emergency room, so we moved. Do not pay attention, do not worry. Do you know what happened to him? Evan asked. Of course, Christopher replied. He's fine. We carried him a little bit. He got up and walked away. What's this man's name? So I can verify the information. Noma's Oliver. The deputy started tapping his fingers thoughtfully. Nemtsov. Walker. Evan, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Oliver woke up with a terrible headache. It was like his life energy had been drained out of him and his body was filled with lead. He couldn't move. And most importantly, he couldn't understand where he was or how he had gotten here. The free artist was lying on his side in a semi-dark room. Everything in front of his eyes was red, as if a tasteless curtain had been thrown in front of him. Only his left arm moved faintly, the rest of his body stiff from the forced pose. Yesterday came back in fragments that appeared before his mind's eye, as if in a kaleidoscope. Here he was being kicked out by Vance. Here he asks to be put in the hospital. Then, as in the good old days, he drinks at Morbilus's and bathes in the fountain. And he seems to be going to the public garden. How did he end up here? When he heard voices, Oliver hurried to cover himself with a sheet. He rolled over onto his back, closed his eyes, and held his breath. You can't do that. The first voice spoke loudly. You can't do that. Look, if it's about this bum, and God with him, who cares about him? Me, I'm interested, answered the first one. You are ex officio deputy chief physician. Yes, ex officio, said the second voice. But in fact, I have a technical degree. Technical. And I'm telling you, you can't do that. The man shouted in a rage. You can't sell funeral paraphernalia outside the main building of the hospital. For God's sake. A second voice contradicted him. That's a lot of money. We should have opened a canteen here, objected the first voice. A pharmacy, anything. But not a ritual store. By the way, where did you get the keys? Christopher blurted out. First, the new head doctor showed him a creepy video of him and a guard dragging Oliver. And then he gave him a hard time about the funeral parlor. And the workdate hadn't even officially started yet. But then Christopher went crazy and opened the door to the store with his own key. What are we gonna do? We have to find a way out of this. Why shouldn't I have a key? I asked him in a subservient manner. I'm the storekeeper. I go around checking things out. What if there's something wrong? What if you get caught short? Evan countered. The hospital would have to pay for it. You're the hired help. The previous day came back to Oliver's mind. The keywords: hospital, doctor, ritual hall. How he, sneaking around in the dark, had decided to get into the room. Where he wondered had he gotten to? Evan, let's not get facetious, Christopher said. Yes, the funeral parlor is not a pleasant sight for some of the more impressionable people. But look at the order inside. What cleanliness! The head doctor had a different opinion. He could smell a subtle but unpleasant odor, which is something people might give off if they're awake. Really? See how neat it is here. Christopher kept pushing. Wreaths to one side, ribbons in another, crosses in a third, coffins. Yeah, let's talk about coffins, Evan agreed. Does this coffin personally? Doesn't raise any questions. Lying under the sheet, Oliver began to shiver. The voices grew louder and the footsteps closer. He thought about taking off his veil, jumping up and running away. But his stiff body would hardly approve of such a dynamic. Can you see? Evan asked. Oh, for crying out loud, there's a dead body in here. It's in the coffin, not in the refrigerator. Christopher's eyes widened. Indeed, in one of the coffins, under the sheet, the outline of a man was clearly visible. The only nuance was that the arms lay unnaturally on his chest, as if they had been placed carelessly. Overcome with fear, Christopher lowered the sheet. His eyes darkened. In the coffin lay the homeless man they had carried around the corner of the hospital yesterday. Good God, the deputy whispered, crossing himself. God forgive me, God forgive me, God forgive me. Father! Evan shouted, running up to the coffin. Father! Christopher sobbed. He felt sorry for everyone. The poor bum whose heart attack yesterday he'd mistaken for a talent act. The new head doctor, who was starting work with such a tragic incident, but most of all himself, because it is he, Christopher, who will be held responsible for what happened, and it looks like it's going to be more than just a dismissal. Investigators from the capital will come here. They will dig, and they will find every penny that leaked past the state treasury. Ahem. Suddenly the corpse coughed and opened his eyes. Oh, Evan, it's been years. Did you forget about your file? In the ensuing silence, a noise was heard as the Deputy Chief Physician for Economic Affairs collapsed to the floor. Evan slapped Christopher's cheeks, trying to bring him to his senses. The Deputy Chief opened his eyes. It's a good thing there's carpeting everywhere, he whispered. I'd have gotten hurt. The homeless guy was waddling around, warming up. How could he be Evan's father? Well, life happens, Christopher thought. Sometimes the most disgusting parents have great kids. But more often than not, it's the other way around. Are you awake? The doctor in charge asked. I want a written explanation. Today. With these words, Evan headed for the exit. He had a hard job ahead of him. If he was met with such a mess at the entrance to the hospital, what would happen next? He had not yet touched the medication, the quality of the treatment, and other aspects that made up the success of the treatment. Evan walked with a steady stride, followed by Christopher, who had come to his senses. Oliver, exhausted from last night's drunkenness, was trailing behind him. He was thirsty, and he was leaning against the faucet of the cooler in the ritual store, behind his son. The Deputy Chief Physician was in such a hurry that he'd forgotten to lock the door. Evan, shouted Christopher as they passed through the lobby of the main building. I can explain everything, I swear. I don't doubt it for a second, the head doctor replied. Both explain and answer. People began to stare at them. Evan felt awkward, realizing that his new staff was getting to know him here and now in a less than ideal environment. But he was not going to change his mind. Dear colleagues, he addressed those who were looking at him and Christopher. I'm sorry we're meeting in such a difficult environment, but we don't have time to dawdle. We have a lot of work to do. Let's get to work. The little speech seemed to make a good impression on the staff. Evan caught a few appreciative glances and smiles and nodded to each one, then froze in indecision, wondering what to do next. Heaven, for a word, a familiar voice sounded behind the newly minted head doctor's back. Victoria, said Evan, turning around. You're the last thing I needed. Evan, I'm not waiting, the girl replied. You'll give me a few minutes right now, or I'll leave you forever. Christopher rubbed his hands together. This was his salvation. Now, according to the situation, he would either organize a private meeting between them or... No, the chief was definitely not going to kick her out. Zaphos decided to take full control of the situation. Yes, don't kick the girl out. He said, come on, I'll show you your new office. You can talk to me. Here, look. This is Frank, our senior security guard. Frank, stay awake. He ran briskly up to the second floor of the main building, taking wide strides. He occasionally looked over his shoulder and made a hand gesture that said, catch up, catch up, catch up. Evan sighed and followed, taking Victoria under his elbow. Victoria, it's nothing personal, the chief said. It's all gone to shit here. That's fine, the nurse smiled. It's about time we got things in order, and I know how. As he passed the guard, Evan beckoned to him. Frank, a word. Oliver couldn't believe his eyes and ears for a long time. This was how his son had grown, not only in height, but also professionally. He's an entire head doctor. Now, probably, it will be possible to go to the hospital as a free hotel and canteen. Now, no one will dare to kick him out on the street and talk to him disrespectfully. And the guard, he can even pull his ears, and nothing will happen to him for this. True, when the free artist was distracted, just for a second. This nimble little man took his son away under his arm with some girl. No problem. We just need to find his office. He is the head doctor. Let the registrar try to stop him. She's the worst for it. Good jobs are hard to find in the city these days. I've done a lot for him, Oliver reasoned aloud. First of all, I brought him into the world. Secondly, I gave him a wonderful dog when he was 3. My wife didn't want him to have one, but who asked her? When my son was 6, I painted a portrait. What else did I do for him? I gave him a name, patronymic, and surname, of course. It wasn't much, but in Oliver's mind, he considered any indulgence to any man to be the highest gratitude on his part. So he was convinced that Evan would not refuse him help. Especially since it was winter and there was nowhere to go. He could go to breakfast in the morning and then to the city, to his favorite pubs and friends, and let them try to keep him out. Freeze. Oliver was brought out of his thoughts by a guard. He literally blocked the road, and the homeless man collided with him with all his might. That's when the power of his opponent was revealed. The guard didn't even stagger, but the artist collapsed to the ground. Hey, big guy, Oliver snapped at him. Get out of the way. This is a secure facility, the guard smiled. You can't come in and out of here as you please. Yes, you can, replied the artist. If your son is the head doctor. Who's that, Evan? The guard asked incredulously. That's your idea. That's a cross. Oliver said with heat. My dear son, it's been 10 years. Evan was under strict orders not to let you in, the guard explained. But I wouldn't have let you in anyway. Get out of here, or I'll call Thomas. To tell you the truth, I should have done that yesterday. No, the guard is definitely lying. There's no way his son, his own flesh and blood, would order his own father off the premises. The officer was definitely cheating. But how do we outsmart this lump? We must get inside by all means and talk to my son face to face. Okay, Oliver smiled. I'll do it. Can I use the restroom? To the bathroom? The guard asked and scratched his head. There were no orders from the chief physician, and to refuse such a request to a beggar is not Christian. Come on, I'll walk you out. As they passed the staircase, Oliver, with an unprecedented impetuosity for his age, suddenly darted away and ran upstairs. The guard shouted after him, but he couldn't move at the same speed. He could not move at the same speed. Here's your office, Chief, Christopher said. Simple but tasteful. In need of repair, of course. The office really didn't make the best impression. A shabby desk, a chair with a broken lift mechanism, a sofa on 3 legs. The walls were peeling and the doorknob was wobbly. Nothing in the world is random though. Christopher had deliberately chosen this particular office so that the new head of the department would ask him to tidy it up. The deputy would demonstrate his own indispensability and efficiency. Good, Evan said. He was unimpressed by this environment. Leave us alone. What about? Christopher began to wail. He was waiting for instructions to clean up the office. All right, go, Evan demanded. We'll deal with you later. The deputy walked out the door, puzzled. Say how messy it is, Evan said. What I have to work with here? You won't believe what happened. Evan, I've been thinking, Victoria said with a touch of solemnity. Marry me. With these words, she got down on one knee, took a box out of her pocket and opened it. Inside were a pair of charming cufflinks. Victoria, get up immediately. The head doctor demanded. What kind of joke is this? What kind of jokes? The girl questioned. You don't ask me to marry you. So I decided to ask you myself. Well, say yes or no. The door swung open. Oliver stood on the threshold, and a few seconds later the guard ran up. Son, shouted the artist. Son, that's how you are with your father, isn't it? Evan, I'm sorry. The guard shouted over him. That old rascal has escaped. Overtaken. The head doctor was silent. Then he looked at Victoria, who continued to needle, and said, You wanted to meet my father. Evan pointed at the dirty bum. Meet Oliver Walker. After, the girl said impatiently. I was asking you a question. I agree, Victoria. I'm in. Only on one condition. You'll work here with me. Okay,